Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and every month or so we do a special tools episode on our Behind the Sawdust vlog that shows you a few of the cool tools that we have here in our workshop. Today we'll have a look at an innovative layout tool set, a mobile scroll saw, a clever dust collection solution, a benchtop jigsaw, and an adorable little measuring tape. If you decide you want to check out one of these tools for yourself, please use the links that I placed in the notes below the video. Just click on the Show More part, I think it's called. Those will take you to Amazon where you can look at other reviews. And if you do decide to buy something using one of those links, it kind of helps us out just a little bit. And don't forget to visit our website and check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. You can get a free subscription there as well. Now let's get started. First up, we have an innovative little layout tool set from Empower. Trammel sets have been around since, well, pretty much forever. I have a couple of antique sets that I use occasionally here in the workshop. They're designed to be put on a wooden stick, which is sometimes called a beam compass. But the Empower set fits on anything up to 1/8 of an inch thick. So if I were to attach them to a metal meter stick, for example, I could create a circle nearly 6 feet in diameter. Of course, how often do you need a 6-foot circle? So I use them more often on a shorter ruler, like the one for my combination square. But what's especially interesting about this set is that it does more than just draw circles. There's an included attachment that cuts circles and arcs as well. I use that feature on paper or on wood veneers once in a while. But where the cutting end really comes in handy is if I wanted to draw a circle or an arc with a very precise line. Just like a traditional marking knife or a panel gauge, a cutting edge will scribe a line much more precise than a pencil will. Because a pencil, especially on wood, the point will tend to blunt, making a wider line, which is less accurate. And so this will do that not just on straight lines like cutting gauges, but also it will scribe a line in a circle or an arc, which makes it really unique. Another thing I use this jig for is to mark a line parallel to an edge using my combination square. In fact, I could mark a double line if I want to by adding a second pencil, such as if I'm going to lay out mortises on a workpiece. Or I can use that cutting tip again to scribe a precise line, just like I would with a traditional cutting gauge. I also like that the parts aren't plastic. They're really high quality. They're made out of anodized aluminum and they've got a really nice fit and finish. In fact, Woodpeckers, which is well known for their high quality anodized aluminum tools, has the set right now on their website for about 20 bucks on sale. So I'll put a link to that in the notes below the video in case you want to check it out. Next up is a tool that I first saw in April Wilkerson's shop. She said that she liked it when I asked her about it, so I got one a couple of months ago and it's already come in pretty handy in our main workshop. It's the Dremelmodo Saw, which is essentially a small scroll saw that can be used with a table or even handheld. We have a couple of large scroll saws in the other shop, but here in the main workshop, I occasionally need one. Not enough to justify the expense or the space of a full-size saw, but often enough that I'm glad I have this thing. I do have a couple of small complaints though. First, the clamps that you use to attach it to the edge of your workbench aren't wide enough for my workbench. So I clamped a piece of plywood on my bench top and then the saw to the plywood, which solved the problem pretty well. I also find the blade changes to be a little bit fiddly. Certainly not as bad as a lot of other scroll saws I've seen, but the first few times I changed the blade, it took me a couple of minutes. I am getting better at it though. The blades themselves are 4 inches long with pin ends, and that's a shorter size than a common scroll saw blade, but there are a couple of different companies that make them. They aren't proprietary and you can find them pretty easily on Amazon or other places on the internet, and they're not very expensive. So that was important to me too. The saw seems to have plenty of power, but the length of the stroke is short, so it does cut a little slowly through thicker materials. One nice feature is the attachable dust collection port. I'm not entirely sure what size shop vac hose it's designed for, but I don't worry about those things anymore because I use the Rockler Dust Right Universal Hose Port Kit. This thing has been a lifesaver in my shop because I have sanders and other small tools like this, and they all seem to have crazy sized ports. I don't know what they're made for. They just guess on these sizes sometimes. But the Rockler set has a couple of rubber grommets that will slip over various port sizes and create a tight seal. So it works really well, and it worked on this too. As far as the dust collection on this saw goes, I would say it's adequate. It seems to collect about 50% of the dust. That will keep the path of the blade clear though, and that's important if you're cutting while following a pattern line. But it is going to make a little bit of a mess if you're doing a lot of scrolling. So this isn't a perfect dust collection solution by any means. I tried to cut some metal with the included specialty blade, and it does cut through even thicker metals slowly, like this piece of steel conduit and even this heavy gauge steel. It didn't bog down the saw, but the cuts were very, very slow. It's really designed for thinner metals like this. I didn't have any brass around the shop, but I think it would probably cut brass really well, and aluminum too. Of course, the most intriguing feature of this saw is that you can take it off the table and then take it to the work instead of bringing the work to the saw. I really like that idea. In fact, it's not a new idea. In fact, I've had one of these saws. This is actually a Dremelmodo Saw. I don't know when they made it, but it was a long time ago. And I don't ever use this thing because it just vibrates the crap out of your hand when you try to use it. This new version of the Moto-Saw has a wider base, and it can be a little tricky, not tricky, but a little bit of a learning curve until you start putting that base up against the workpiece, and then you'll realize that that takes all the vibration out of it and makes it very easy to control and pretty accurate too. I don't know how often you're going to use it handheld, but I could see some situations, and I found a couple in my own work where it did come in pretty handy. You can use it to cut the waste between dovetails, the tails, not the pins, because the pins are you got to cut it at an angle, and you can't hold this at an angle to the workpiece, and still get an accurate cut. So bottom line is, I think that the saw is a good solution if you want to do a little bit of scrolling and you don't want to invest in a full-size saw or take up the space of a full-size saw. Maybe you have a really small workshop, or you're in an apartment, or you want to take something with you. I think that the Dremelmodo Saw is a good option as a scroll saw, with the bonus that you can use it handheld. Now, while we're talking about handy saws, there is another one that I use quite often too. I actually built a homemade version of this, which works just as well. I'll put a link to the build video of my homemade version and to the plans in the notes below this video if you want to go the homemade route. My problem is that my homemade version is over at the other shop. So when I saw the Rockler version on sale, I think it was at Lowe's or Home Depot, I bought it. This is a few months back. What I like about this type of saw is that it gives me more control over the workpiece compared to as if I was using a handheld jigsaw or saber saw. Blade changes are really easy, right from the top of the table, no tools needed, that was nice. And it uses common jigsaw blades, so you can buy all sorts of specialty blades for it, including blades for cutting tile and even metal. It cut through the steel conduit much faster than the scroll saw did, and it even does a reasonably good job on thicker sheet steel. I use it in that capacity occasionally for odd jobs and jig making. But what I use this saw for the most is making pierced cuts that I couldn't make on a bandsaw. It's remarkably accurate as long as you don't overfeed the workpiece. That would cause it to drift. I can track a line pretty well. In fact, easier than if I was using a handheld jigsaw. It comes with dust collection, but again, the port is an odd size. Thankfully, there's a smaller grommet in that Rockler Dust Right Universal Hose Port Kit set that will just stretch over this one. And so I was able to try out the dust collection. I don't use the dust collection on this very often though, because it only collects about 75% of the dust. That's better than the scroll saw, but this makes a lot more dust. And so it can make a little bit of a mess. But the dust collection is enough to keep the path clear as you cut so you can see what you're doing. And that makes sense. The included fence does a pretty good job too. I didn't even bother trying to square it to the table. I just clamped it on and pushed through a cut. One end of the cutoff was about a 32nd of an inch wider than the other end, but I wasn't very careful about keeping it up against the fence during the cut. So that's remarkable accuracy for what's really not intended to be a precision tool, in my opinion. Anyway, whether you buy one or you make one, I think you'll find that you'll use this type of benchtop jigsaw a lot more than you expected. I know I use either my homemade one or this one all the time in the workshop. So I'll put links to both of them below the video. Our last tool is perhaps the best value I've seen in a long time when you consider how often I use it compared to what it cost. It's a mini measuring tape. I got it off Amazon for $5. In fact, I bought several of them because I love them that much. I keep one in my apron pocket in the shop, one on my desk in the office, one in the drawer in the kitchen, one in a drawer in the living room, one in my wife's office, one in the car, one in my wife's car. My wife has one in her purse. I have one in my purse. Just kidding. You can't believe how handy it is to have a mini measuring tape close at hand at any time. The Stanley is a good balance between length at 10 feet and a small size. The other ones are usually 3 to 6 feet long. I also have a smaller one that I keep on my keyring. I know you may be wondering why someone would need to measure things that often, but once you have the ability to, you'll understand what I mean. The best bang for your buck of pretty much any hand tool, hands down. I'll put a couple links to some of my favorite ones in the notes below the video. Well, that about wraps things up for this edition of Behind the Sawdust. Next time we'll do something different. Of course, we produce more than just vlogs. We have videos that are on techniques, tips, tutorials, all sorts of things, and they all come together in every issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. So head over to our website, stumpynubs.com, where you can read and subscribe for free. Then you can sit back and have yourself a cold one, because you've earned it, my friend.